So welcome. This session is on the accessible experience, designing for everyone. This is different than most accessibility talks or papers or blogs that I've read, in that it's entirely focused on the design and the design process. And this isn't necessarily just for web design. The stuff I'm going to talk about also applies to designing a mobile app, or a poster or a printed document, or the UI for a game system. All these kind of things you can do in the design process, I think is really make a big difference. And I hope that by the end of this, you're going to get a better understanding of how to design something in such a way that you maximize the number of people that get to enjoy your design. So first, a little bit about me. My name is Dan Moyard. I'm the lead front-end developer at Forum One. And I've been working with Drupal for about 6 or 7 years, and I've been in web development a lot longer than that. If you ever need to get in touch with me, you can find me at DC Moyard, pretty much everywhere. That's my Drupal.org username. That's my Twitter handle, GitHub, anywhere. That's where you can find me. So a little background. I guess one of the things that really got me into working on accessibility is pretty much a selfish reason. I am legally blind, and I also have trouble with hearing. I was born, without really bad hearing, and I've been wearing hearing aids all my life. But luckily, that's pretty consistent. When I was about 12, I was diagnosed with something called retinitis pigmentosa, which means that I can't see when it's dark. And it also means that I have tunnel vision. So my vision, I can see what I'm looking at, but everything else is very hard for me to see. And I think as we get towards the end of this, I hope all of you get the sense that the stuff that you learn here, you can apply for selfish reasons as well. Because everyone is going to have to deal with this kind of stuff. So I'm going to talk about 3 things. The first is the importance of accessibility. Not necessarily what accessibility is. Hopefully you know a little bit what it is, but more like why is it important? And then I'm going to talk about some of the 4 main types of disability that you need to really be aware of in the design process, especially on the web. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some of the really meaty part, like what are the specific design considerations that you need to know during the design process to keep, to make the most amount of people enjoy your design. So first, why is accessibility so important? So this is a picture of my son, DJ. I have 3 kids. He is the oldest. He just turned 11. And he just finished 5th grade. And in one of his class projects for this past spring was they had to interview people about their jobs, what they do. And so the teachers in the 5th grade, they'd emailed all the parents and said, hey, if you're interested, we would like the kids to interview you, about your job. And they're going to have like a job fair in school, make these posters and stuff. It's really cool. So I said, sure, I'll put my name in. And a couple of students ended up interviewing me. And there were some really unique questions. Like there were some like, what do you do? What's the starting salary? What kind of education do you need? One of the interesting ones was, explain your job to me in a way that I can, make another 5th grader understand it. And I have a little trouble explaining what a front-end developer does to my family, But the question that was in there because they all had like these questions they were supposed to ask, and the one that was in there that really struck hard at me is this. How does your job contribute to making the world better? This really took a grab at me to really make me think about it. I never really thought of my job in those terms before. I've always, usually the job is, just something so you get money, right? And my philosophy has always been find a job of something that you enjoy doing that you can get paid at. But when they asked this, like, what do you do that makes the world better? I was like, wow. And so 2 things really jumped into my my mind. The first thing was, I'm really lucky that I work for a company like Forum One, where we partner with a lot of influential organizations to sort of craft solutions for some of the world's most pressing problems. And so, like, we deal with social justice, healthcare, international aid, and even environmental concerns. I grew up, sort of like an avid outdoorsman, and so it really meant a lot to me that I got to work on EPA.gov, sort of to push that, to help push the environmental movement. The other thing that really made me think of is accessibility. In my job description, I have to build websites that are accessible. I have to help make sure the designs work. I have to help make sure that people benefit from the stuff that I do. And so this is sort of the moral reason, of why accessibility is important. This is a great quote from Judith at the U.S. Department of Education. She said, "For people without disabilities, technology makes things convenient. But for people with disabilities, it makes things possible." I think, 100 years ago, I'd be hard-pressed to think of what I could do to be sort of a contributing member of society, trying to make things better for everybody. Because it's really tough for me to see, and it's tough for me to work sometimes. Luckily we have computers, and I can set it up in a way that I can see. But back then, I probably would have been a blind piano player. There's a bunch of them back in the day. And so this idea of making things work for everybody is, it's not just a moral reason. There's also a legal reason. It's the law. Sometimes you can get sued. This is my favorite reason, but it is something that unfortunately needs to be there because there are some people or some corporations where they're not going to really take a notice unless you affect their bottom line. So for example, in 2006, Target was sued because their online store was completely inaccessible to screen readers. They ended up having to pay $10 million. In 2010, Disney was sued. 2011, Netflix was sued. The cool thing about the Netflix suit is that this year, starting this year, 2014, all of their content will have closed captioning. But those are only the most common reasons you hear about why accessibility is so important. It's the right thing to do, and there's legal implications. But the one that I really try to press home is this. Everybody is disabled. I want that to sink in. Everyone is disabled. It's probably tough for some of you to imagine. So when I'm talking about disability, usually when you talk about accessibility, most people just think of, it's people who are blind, and they need to use a screen reader, in order to access the website. But that's not it. There's a lot more to it. There's a whole breadth of what you need to deal with. You also have to deal with people who have low vision, which is, in America, is about 9% of the population are visually impaired. And so it's also, it affects the aging population. So when you're about 20, your eyesight starts to deteriorate. No matter what other conditions you might have, at 20 it starts to deteriorate. And by the time you are 40, only half the light will get through to your retina as it did when you're 20. And when you're 60, only 20%. So as you get older, and you have to have audiences that are in an aging demographic, the low vision really plays an important part in their ability to see stuff. I posted a joke on Twitter about a year ago how, far in the future, they're going to be anthropologists, and they're going to be able to calculate how old a web designer is based on what font size they chose.
And the context. Right?
Yeah. So, but again, this isn't everybody, right? Like, I'm sure some of you think, oh, Dan, that's not everybody. How many of you have a smartphone or a tablet? Like, pretty much everybody, right? This is the conference. How many of you ever gone outside on a nice sunny day? You're trying to look up to contact something or the street address or something. You can often have trouble, right? The sun, the glare. This is what we call a situational disability. Where something in your environment, something in the tool that you're using to interact, something that is a barrier, that is a situational disability. And there's a really cool article written about a month ago, I believe, about this lady in England. And she was talking about the difference between having a disability and being disabled. She said she grew up all her life thinking she had a disability. She couldn't, she was stuck in a wheelchair. And it was just sort of ingrained in her that she couldn't get into that store because she was, had a disability. And as she got older, she realized that it's not necessarily her fault she can't get into the store. It's the people who built the store that have only steps. There's no ramps. So the store disabled her. So like, would you build a website with a form and you disabled all the fields? No, you're disabling everybody from filling out that form. Except for the really clever front-end folks that can go and inspect a web element and change the property. So you have to think about what you do affects everybody. And so in this concept with situational disabilities, anything you do design-wise, development-wise, that makes it easier or makes it work for people who are blind or people who have vision problems, guess what? It also helps people that have these situational disabilities. So making things accessible makes things a lot better for everyone. And this isn't a new concept. This is something that's been around for at least half a century or more in architecture, industrial design and stuff. And it's called universal design. And it's this: to design a product and environment to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. And the key part here is to the greatest extent possible, because there is such a wide variety of challenges and impairment that people have that you're never going to be able to design or build something that is 100% accessible. Just as if you work in usability and you run usability tests on your website, you're never going to be able to come up with a solution that is 100% usable for everybody. People have different ways they like to think about things. They may think, of organization, words differently. So you're never going to be able to do it 100%, but you want to maximize the number of people that benefit from your work. Okay, so let's move on. So the next I'm going to talk about are the 4 main types of disabilities that you want to think about when you're designing. And those are vision, hearing, mobility, and cognitive. And I'm going to talk about them in this order for 2 reasons. One, this is usually the order, like when you first starting getting into accessibility, the order of which you usually think of them. Usually when you just get into accessibility, it's all about screen readers and people who are blind, and you have to work about that. And you get into a little bit more, you start reading the 508 guidelines and stuff. Oh, yeah, we need to worry about closed captioning for people who can't hear. And then you start to research it a little bit more, and you start to realize, wow, all the people that, they can't use a mouse. They have to use a joystick or some binary input device. And then finally, the last group of people that you normally think about are people who have cognitive challenges, whether it's, attention or memory, or a brain injury. The other reason I'm going to talk about them in this order is it's actually the reverse order of how many people are affected. So it's really hard to get sort of concrete statistics on, what types of disabilities people have. But the general rule of thumb is that there are more people who have low vision problems than there are who are blind. And there are more people who are hearing impaired than who have low vision problems. Remember earlier, I said 9% of Americans, are visually impaired. So there's more of that are hearing impaired. And next, there's more people who have mobility problems than have hearing problems. And then finally, there are more people who have cognitive difficulties with dealing things than all of the others combined. there's a really interesting article that came out, I think it was a month ago, about how, all these people, they're still worried about, fixing sites to work in IE8. They put all this time and budget and energy into making sure, it works, And, the number of people who will access your site to have any of these 4 problems is a lot higher than it is for IE8. So let's dig in first into vision. So these are the main types of vision impairments. And again, these are sort of the broad spectrum, with people who are completely blind, people who have low vision problems, whether it's through tunnel vision and peripheral vision, whether it's color blindness, or it's also situational things, like the glare. It could be, you just woke up, and your eyes are still kind of hazy, or it could even be the monitors. Like this is a projection screen. Projection screens are notoriously, not very good mediums. Luckily, in MIT, we have good resolutions and stuff. But there was I was in a project a couple years ago, and the client, they were very passionate about colors. They had their brand guidelines, and they had this blue that the one client absolutely loved. And he was like, this has to be integral. So of course, the designer took it into consideration, created this comp, and we had a phone call, discussion, and you can tell he's really upset. And he's, I can't believe, and he's trying to get it out. I'm like, what is it? He's like, why did you choose purple? I mean, blue are the brand guidelines. I mean, and we're scratching and thinking, what is he talking about? And it turns out, after more discussion, that his monitor was just uncalibrated. Yeah. So you have to keep that in mind as you're designing stuff. Designers usually have the latest and the greatest, and they calibrate the monitor to make sure it outputs with whatever the printer is and whatever. So keep that in mind when dealing with vision stuff. So let's have some hands-on stuff. So first is talk a little bit about screen readers. These are the 4 main types I like to use for testing. The first is voiceover. If you have a Mac, this is the easiest one to test. It's just Command F5, and that'll turn it on. Another one that's really easy to use is Chromevox. And this will use, it's a Chrome extension, so you can use it on Windows, Mac, or Linux. And there's a really good tutorial here that sort of walks you through how it works. There's also NVDA, which is an open source one that's really been, luckily getting a lot of speed lately, a lot of adoption. And then finally is JAWS, which is sort of I like to think of it as the Microsoft of screen readers. It's a little antiquated, it's very expensive, and it's very slow moving to catch up with standards. So let's do a quick demo now with VoiceOver. So this is the Marichan website. So let me turn on VoiceOver, and you'll see what it's like.
VoiceOver on Rome. Martian foods, ramen noodles, vertical line, American instant lunch, vertical line, ramen recipes. Japanese ramen noodles, vertical line, American yakisoba. Window. Martian foods, ramen noodles, vertical line, American instant lunch, vertical line, ramen recipes. Japanese ramen noodles, vertical line, American yakisoba. HTML content has keyboard focus.
That was just the title. Let's see, what?
You are currently on HTML. Link image. American ramen noodles, ramen recipes. Japanese ramen noodles. Link, slash.
Slash. I wonder what kind of slash that.
You are currently on a link. Internal link, slash. Link image. American ramen noodles, ramen recipes. Japanese ramen noodles. Link image. American ramen noodles, ramen recipes. Japanese ramen noodles. Link image. American ramen noodles, ramen recipes. Japanese ramen noodles.
I'm getting the idea that they just every link is about these ramen noodles.
You are currently on a link image. American ramen noodles, ramen recipes. Link image. American ramen noodles, ramen recipes. Link image. American ramen noodles, ramen recipes. Japanese ramen noodles. VoiceOver off.
What's a blank image?
I'm sorry?
What does blank image mean?
I'm sorry?
Blank image? What does that mean?
Oh, blank image? That means that they use an image as a link and then provide any alt text. So basically, it kind of sounds like They hired an SEO expert, and he just kind of vomited all over the markup. So like when you're designing stuff, it's not just visual stuff that you're designing. You also want to think about the oral experience. So like through a screen reader, you can design what people hear. You can tell stories in a way that you can't in a visual manner. And the really cool thing is in Drupal 8, Jesse Beach and Wim Lear did a really cool job. They added the Drupal.announce, which is a JavaScript thing that allows you, when you create something, you can tell it to say something to a screen reader. So if you have a pop-up modal dialog or some other sort of, fancy interaction, you can control the audio interface. So think about that as part of your design process. Okay, so next, hopefully everybody has a smartphone. I'll let you get it out and try this. Turn it on. And what this will do is it will allow you to sort of hear whatever you see on your mobile device. So I encourage you to try this and go visit some websites. Websites you'd like, websites maybe you built something, and get a sense from a mobile, what it sounds like. I'll give you about a minute. And incidentally, for those of you, I'm sorry.
The Android thing, can you show me? I don't get it.
Oh, for input, for which device?
I think I'm on 4 up.
Okay, this iPhone or Android? Or something?
So, square, right?
Okay. Yeah. Oh, maybe I go to like the home screen or.
Okay, home screen. But then there'd be nothing to read, right?
This Windows?
No, it's fake Windows.
Okay.
I hacked it.
Okay, yeah. Maybe go to like the menu settings.
Okay, yeah.
Or that.
Yeah, maybe go.
Okay. By the way, this is very helpful if you are outside, when you're trying to get like walking directions somewhere, and it gets really sunny and you can't see it anymore. Turn this on and it'll read you the direction to where you want to go. Okay, so next, here, can everybody look at see the slides real quick? How many of you felt a little uncomfortable when I switched it to this slide? Like it hurt your eyes a little bit at all? Yeah. This is a great quote that I love. And this was in an email list quite a few years ago of like developers saying like what color combinations they use like in their terminal as they're coding. And he said, black text on white was like looking at ants on a light bulb. And this is what people with photophobia, how they see the world. Like whenever there's these bright lights, it sort of hurts their eyes. And a large percentage of people with vision problems have photophobia. So myself included. So like that spotlight, that kind of hurts my eyes. So later when we're asking questions, if you're sitting over there, I'm probably not going to be able to see you. So you can just, I don't know, somebody over here will have to show me whoever's asking questions. So the cool thing about this, though, is especially like with, like on OS X and on the iOS devices, I can easily switch and invert it. With Control, Option, Command, 8. Or if you have like an iPhone or an iPad, you can just triple click the home and it'll invert it. I'm really hoping that they bring this to Android and other devices. So like when we talk about like color contrast, and I'll get into a lot more detail later about color contrast, but for this point, I just want to get across sort of the background color and the text color. So traditionally, more people prefer to have a light background with dark text. It's about 50-50, maybe a little bit more, but more people prefer it, whereas other people prefer a dark background with light text. And there have been studies in the past saying that you should use a light background with dark text because it's more readable. And there have been some more recent studies that say, well, that's not necessarily the case. That's usually just a matter of preference. The key thing is the difference in the luminance between the background and the foreground. And so you really want to avoid sort of having a complete black or complete white background. Okay, so here, of course, is Drupal.org. And I've created a bunch of screenshots to try to give you a sense of what people with different challenges, how they might view that site. Now, so this is just out of the box, no vision problem, probably what you see. This is what it would look like for someone with photophobia. You see the difference? Let me switch back and forth real quick. So what you see is these bright areas tend to bleed out into everything else. And so that's why, like the color contrast of text is important. It's also why sometimes if you use like those really thin fonts, it can sometimes be problematic. So this is what it looks like for someone with deuteranopia. So this is for someone who's colorblind, and they can't really differentiate and see the green color spectrum as well. And this is with somebody with photophobia. This is someone who can't see red that well. And they look actually very similar. And that's why they generally call it red-green color blindness, because they both tend to look about the same, and they have trouble distinguishing between the two. The one main difference is that for people who can't really see red, is that red becomes much darker. So it becomes almost black. So keep that in mind. So this is for somebody where they can't see what they're looking at. This is called macular degeneration. So in your eyes, you have the rods and the cones, and they determine what you see like in front of you, and the cones can give you visual information of the peripheral stuff. So you can see they lose color, they lose all kinds of stuff in the center. And this is what it looks like for someone with tunnel vision, where they can see what they're looking at, but can't really see anything around it. So that's why being able to have readable text is important. So for somebody who can't see what they're looking at, they have to read with their peripheral vision. And if you have small text like contrast, it becomes very hard for them. And for someone with tunnel vision, you have to make sure that if you design something that's, where you really need to see the whole picture, they're not going to be able to see that. Or if you design, paragraphs with a really long line length, like a really wide measure, they're going to have a hard time finding the next line when they go back and forth. Okay, so next let's talk about some of the hearing stuff. So again, this is the wide spectrum. It's not to people who are completely deaf. It's not to people who have some sort of hearing loss, or if they're in a crowded bar, with a lot of background noise. It can be really hard, or if they're in a situation where there's no speakers. Suppose you're lying in bed, at night and you want to watch a movie, but your husband or wife is trying to get some sleep. Closed captioning, that can help. Situational disabilities. So here is a really cool demo. This is so I currently live in just outside DC, and this Gallaudet is a university for the deaf and the hard of hearing, where they go through college and they learn all this stuff with sign language stuff. So this is a great video. Let's see if you can. Well, we can hear it. Let's try this again. There we go. So how many of you here can read sign language? Would you have any idea what they were saying if it didn't have closed captioning. So that's one of the really cool things I like about this video, is they sort of made it very obvious, of why closed captioning is so important. Okay, so next let's move along to sort of the mobility impairment. And again, it's the same broad spectrum that I've been talking about of each, disability type. It's people who are completely deaf, people who are completely immobile, paralysis. It could be something temporary, like where you break a bone, where you can no longer use that hand, to work on your mobile phone. And you just also, mobile devices and touch devices. That is sort of a mobility impairment. It's not like the desktop experience where you have this mouse, you have complete control over it. You have fat fingers, so that some of those small touch targets make a big difference. So here's the video of someone that uses a joust.
Hi, my name is Mark. This is how I use my joust too. I'm paralyzed from the shoulders down as a result of a spinal cord injury, and I use my joust all the time, many days, many hours, and I'll show you how I use it. Here is Facebook. I go on Facebook enough that I'm not addicted, but I use it enough. Here's a post from my mom. She says, hey, honey, give me a call. And I said, Mom, come on, you were just here for 6 weeks. We don't have anything left to talk about. Another thing I do, I like to plan vacations. Here's looking up some hotels on Expedia and hopefully plan a vacation. Another thing I like to do is watch movies. Here's a movie. This is a movie about, it's an IMAX movie. It's about oil fires that were in Kuwait after the Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990. It's a pretty interesting movie. Another thing I do here is Yelp. So you can read reviews at restaurants. Here's where we're going to go to dinner tonight in Los Angeles, outside of LA. Another thing I do is Skype. Here's Skype. I like to use the webcam that's on top of the monitor. Talk to my grandparents. They are pretty savvy with Skype, considering they are 88 years old. Works pretty well. Another thing I do is email. Use Outlook to check email and all that. Try to stay in contact with friends. Another thing I use is voice recognition software. Dragon Dictate, or Dragon Naturally Speaking. I use this in combination with the joust. I'll show you how it works. Wake up. Tonight we are going to eat at Froggy's Fish Market. Period. Go to sleep. Now you can see it's spelled Froggies wrong. It has Fridays instead of Froggies. So what I do, if it doesn't know a word, I use this little on-screen keyboard out here, and I'll click using my joust, and I will spell out Froggies. That's what is great about the joust. Other on-screen keyboards are not near as accurate as that. You wouldn't be able to hit buttons like this. You wouldn't be able to hover over the key on the keyboard. So then I'll type in my email. That's another useful thing about that on-screen keyboard. You can program macros so that just hit one button, types in your whole email address. It's pretty awesome. Another thing I do is use Google Earth.
No, so keep this in mind that not everybody can easily use all interfaces. Sometimes you have to go through a lot of hoops and hurdles in order to do something. So if you design like a really long, contact us form, the more things you add, it makes it hard for somebody who has to be able to struggle to get through everything. And if you simplify that form, capture only stuff you really need, it really helps them. It also makes it a lot easier for everybody else to fill out that form.
Question.
Sure.
It's very good that you became sensitized to this limitation, but in real practicity, how much can you influence as a programmer the websites. Obviously, when they sell, for example, this equipment, they sell all the programming setups so they can accomplish whatever they need in the browser. So, I mean, I can see the part of the visual part, the impairment for the auditive section, but in mobility, I don't see the applicability for a programmer to help there in the web design. You know, I don't know if I explained myself.
Okay, so your question is, or your comment is, you don't see how the visual design affects mobility stuff?
No, the mobility part.
Mobility?
As the web designer, you can just influence in how you present the site, in the visual and in the auditive too. But in the mobility, I don't see how can you actually do any application to make it easier when most of the equipment that they use is factory-based, probably produced by them. Now, if I design equipment,
okay, so the key here is that, you know, first of all, this is about design as a whole. It's not just visual. But even from a visual standpoint, you can design, you know, websites, web apps, you know, whatever it is that makes it more obvious of where they need to go. You know, so if you have no visual hierarchy on your page, you know, someone with a mouse, they can easily pogo stick and try to figure out where they need to go. But for someone with mobility problems, pogo sticking is a big, big deal.
The font size, even. He's sitting much further away from the screen.
I'm sorry?
Even the font size is a consideration, because he's sitting much further away from the screen than your typical user.
Yep.
So that's another visual design decision.
Yep, absolutely.
yeah, but for example, the web that I see him visiting is actually a very complicated website, and he managed to go through that.
Well, but it's probably not the easiest thing. Like, it could be much better.
Well,
right?
nothing that he does will be easier, but
Okay. So next, usually for this presentation is I have people come up and try these two tasks. And the first one is for Craigslist. And I'm not going to do it for this time because I think there's a higher percentage of actual designers here rather than just sort of people who are interested in general accessibility. And so I want to save some time for some of the really nitty-gritty details of design stuff. So for this example, is I would have somebody come up and using just a trackball. So it's like this mouse is like a big trackball and a couple of big buttons that my kids loved because when they were young, they couldn't really use a regular mouse. So I had this. And it was kind of old, so it was kind of hard to use. And I had somebody come up and I said, okay, you got 1 minute. You know, I want you to buy a T-shirt from, you know, such and such a city. And they had a really hard time trying to navigate the page, you know. Some of them, like, they forgot the scroll bar even existed. They're like, you know, I'm used to the scroll wheel on my mouse. How do I get down? You know, and so if you look at Craigslist, you know, there's a lot of options, you know. And again, when you're moving, like even like on a touch, on a laptop, you know, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly where you are. It's very small, you know. And, you know, one of the good things that Craigslist does do is that if you just do go to Craigslist.org, you're not seeing this. You know, they'll use location detection and send it to, you know, whatever city you need to go to. So the next demo that I had people do is come up and using only a keyboard, try to book a flight on the new Virgin New Virgin American. So, you know, this came out a couple months ago. You know, beta.Virgin America. And it got a lot of praise. You know, because it's a really nice design, it's much sleek interface, and you can easily get the stuff. But they really left out. So here, let's see. I'm going to try to tab through, see if I can fill out. Can anybody tell where I am on the page? Because there's no indication, visual, of where you are. Like if you use the mouse, you know, some of these things, oh, they get highlighted. Whereas if you just go through the keyboard, you have no idea where you are. And so this one, every single person failed. There's no way you could figure out where you are in order to figure out to buy a plane ticket from one place to another. So when you're designing sort of like these, like the states, like the hover effect, you also need to think about the focus state of when they, not only hover over some of the link, when they're focused on it, when they're focused in a format, when they're focused on that button. Okay, so finally I'm going to talk about some of the cognitive impairments and how this is such a large area. There's a wide variety of impairment types when it comes to cognitive issues. And again, it's people who have severe problems or a range of problems, or it could even be stuff where it's a situational disability. It's like, for example, you're in the grocery store, when you're trying to figure out what, how many calories are in this box of cereal, and your kids are screaming, and there's somebody next to you stacking it, and so it's really hard to concentrate. That's a situational disability. So a couple of things to think about. First is this. So maybe some of you have seen this before. So I want you to imagine, even if you don't have any trouble, with attention deficit disorder or anything, how would you focus, on accomplishing what you need to do on this page? You need to lease a car.
You walked into the party like you were walking onto a yacht. Your ass bleeding below one eye. Your scars were softly cut. You had the one eye in the mirror. You walked yourself around, and all the girls dream that they'd be a part of their.
So does anybody have any idea what they're supposed to click in order to lease a car? There's too much distractions, and this isn't just an issue for, as I said before, someone who has, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, where they can't concentrate, there's too much stuff going on. Even just regular everyday people, there's too much information, too distraction.
This is real?
Yes, it's real. It's a real site. So take this as an example. So Medium.com, if you're not aware of it, it's sort of like a new blogging platform. And what they've done is they really simplify things. So that if you're reading an article, that's all you're doing. It just shows you the article, it just shows you the text. The editing interface is the same as well. If you're just editing a piece of content, everything else goes away. Again, the search interface is really cool. If you need to search something, everything else goes away, and you're just shown the search box. So these are just really cool tools you can do from a design standpoint to not only make it easier for someone who has a hard time focusing, it helps everybody to be able to get rid of all of these distractions and stuff. And then finally, another type of sort of situational disability when it comes to content stuff is not being able to read the language. Have you ever seen some of like foreign websites? You can't read what it is, but you have kind of a good idea of like how it's structured, like what button you're supposed to push. So this is a good example. It's in Japanese. It uses buttons and it uses icons, and you have a good idea of what you need to do. They have all these, what they call visual affordances of like, hey, makes it obvious, this is the button. And using more than just text, using iconography to sort of get along what you need to convey. Okay, so hopefully, so we have enough time. I really want to get into sort of like the meat and potatoes of this. And this is the specific design considerations you want to keep in mind as you're designing something. So the four things I'm going to talk about are animation, I'm going to talk about typography, color, and then finally, it's really important, sort of like communication, visual communication, being able to communicate your ideas through your design. So first is animation. And this is really important because this is probably the one thing that you can do as a designer that can cause physical harm. And that is having something that flickers on your page, like that Lincoln's car site we just saw. So in 1997, in Japan, an episode of Pokemon aired, and for about 30 seconds, the entire background flashed red and blue for just 30 seconds. And because of that, it was about 700 Japanese kids and adults had to go to the hospital because of photo-induced epilepsy, or eye headaches, eye strain, upset stomach, things that were bad enough that they had to go to the hospital. It also affected a lot more people, with physical discomfort, but not enough that they had to go to the hospital. So when it comes to sort of flicker on a website, just eliminate it. You really don't want it. If there is some sort of design business goal where you absolutely need it, you don't want anything to flicker more than 3 times a second. The other is for animation is sort of, you want to make it have a purpose. You have some sort of business goal or strategic idea in mind for that animation, rather than it just being a distraction. Now, so this came out last spring, the CSS Chick library. So what it does, you can just have something that shakes on a page. And you need to be careful. So, I mean, it can be a really good, something that, an extra bit of polish or something, but you just want to limit it to something small only whenever they hover over or something. If you have something that's, continuously shaking, that's going to be really distracting. And they have all these examples down below of just distracting stuff that I can't even read any of that text. Okay, so next is typography. So this is what? Like 90% of web design. Because how typography works is people need to be able to read it. This is a great quote from Emil Ruder from the Swiss Design School. A printed work which cannot be read becomes a product without purpose. What's the point of having all this text on your page, if a lot of people can't even read it? And so I highly encourage you, if you haven't already, is really read up on typography best practices. Learn about line height. What are legible and readable font choices? Learn about the measure, the line width, the leading, and all kinds of really things that really give it polish. Also make the people who have challenges seeing or have challenges concentrating, it makes it a lot easier for them to read the content. To get into a little bit more detail, first is font size. You really want to make sure that it's big enough that they can read, especially the body copy. So like the second bullet point, the 16 pixels on a monitor equals about 12 points in a book. So by default, all browsers, if you set it to 100%, it's roughly equals 16 pixels. And this was true maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It's not really the case anymore because there is such a wide variety of screen resolutions and dimensions and stuff. So some of the newer high-res displays, 16 pixels is actually a lot smaller, like 10 points, sometimes 9 points. Or some, even a projection screen, or if you're surfing a website on a TV, so like there's like the different mobile devices and tablets and stuff. Sometimes they hold it close, sometimes they hold it far away. And so you need to be really mindful of the font size. So like whenever you do like a responsive design, make sure you check all the devices, make sure you can still read it. Another really cool thing about having this sort of like a larger font size for the body copy is it gives you a lot more leeway to sort of experiment with some of the smaller type. You know, like the byline, something that's not quite essential. You know, if you have your default body copy at like 12 pixels, you can't get any smaller for the byline and stuff. Whereas if you use a larger text size for the body copy, you know, you're able to create more of a hierarchy, you know, from a textual standpoint. So the next is sort of the text alignment. So in general, you want to have things left aligned. It makes it a lot easier to scan. Like if you have bulleted lists or headings, it makes it a lot easier to scan. You can get away with sort of like small stuff that's sort of like center aligned, you know, for maybe sort of like a visual effect. But if it's like a part of a main body copy of an article, make it left aligned. You know, and you can't really, people who are used to sort of like the desktop publishing where things are like fully justified, you can't really do that on the web. You know, there's not that much control over like how words break and stuff like that. And so you get what are these called rivers in the text, which are basically like these kind of wide, you know, spacing between all the words. Not only does it make it look a little unsightly, but especially for people who are dyslexic, like it's, you know, they see those rivers and it really throws them off. It makes it really hard to read. And also italics. It can be problematic at really small font sizes. It can also, you also want to make sure if you're using like a, you know, like a web font, and using the font-based attributes, you want to make sure whatever font you're using also has an italic version of the font. Otherwise, the browser is just going to sort of fake it, and it looks really pixelated. You know, so another thing to consider is that if you have like something like the smaller text treatments, and you need to emphasize something, try using bold instead of italics. That's sort of that, you know, emphasis. And then finally for typography is the color contrast. You know, I mentioned before about how people sometimes prefer a dark background or a light background. But either way you go, you want to make sure that there's enough color contrast between the background and the foreground. It really increases the readability, you know, the legibility, you know, and there is no perfectly readable or legible font that you can use. You know, you want something that is legible and readable, but still has enough character for your design to help convey, you know, whatever aesthetic you're trying to get across. You know, and again, for smaller text, is you want to have, you usually need more color contrast in order to get that same amount of difference. This is a really cool site. This is the Contrast Rebellion. This came out, I think, a year or two ago, and it basically gives you a really good argument of like how you can have high contrast and still have it look very good. You know, another thing to consider that, you know, that I mentioned before is some people, you know, they'll look at your designs in the inverse. And if you have enough color contrast, it'll work either way. So here's some of the tools. The one cool one is in Photoshop they just added, where you can easily do a proof and see like the various color difficulty you might have, like the protanopia if you can't see red, or deuteranopia if you can't see green. So of these, Color Oracle is my favorite. And it's a program that you can install on your computer, and it works on Windows, Mac, or Linux, and it'll visually change your entire screen to how it would look like with somebody with that trouble. So for example, I have it here. You know, so this is what this slide looks like for someone with deuteranopia. This is what it looks like if they can't see red that well. And then finally, I want to talk about you want to use more than color to convey meaning. So can everybody put your hands up? We're going to do a little test. So how many of you remember the keynote yesterday morning? Christine was talking about the 5-second usability test. We're going to do something much more difficult. Okay, you're all paying attention now. Good. Your hands off your laptops and your mobile devices. Because you need to pay attention. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the next slide really quick. You can put your hands down, by the way. Show you the slide really quick. And jump back. And I want you to see if you can tell me what it is. You need to pay attention really hard. This is very difficult. Okay, so what was that? That was...
We're designers.
It was barely on there. How could you tell?
And Star Trek, yep.
That's a really bad picture. I mean, you can't even see the whole stop sign. It's really fuzzy. But you could tell like that. Why?
You usually see stop signs in Boston.
What?
You see stop signs in Boston, zooming by them in the corner of our eye.
Yeah. So why could you tell this is a stop sign so quickly?
Shape, color.
The red. Yes. You can use color. You know, it is a very powerful design tool. Use color to convey information. What else?
Shape.
The shape. Shape of the sign. What else?
Type.
I'm sorry?
The type.
The type, the text. Yep. That helps. Now, have you ever seen stop signs in foreign languages? You know, like in Spanish or French or Turkish, you know, or even Arabic, you can still tell it's a stop sign. What else?
Contrast.
I'm sorry?
The contrast.
The contrast, right. So even if you take away the color, you know, some of you can't see red, there's enough luminance contrast they can still see things. Anything else?
You can see it at night because it's
Sorry?
You can see it at night because it's reflective.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of like the color contrast. There's also the line of the design tool. There's also two more that you're probably not going to be able to notice unless you've been following along the slides on your own laptop. The first is the URL, the path. It's a stop sign. You know, so as part of you know, that path is another thing you need to design to help people know exactly where they are. And finally, has anybody been have the, you know, this on your laptop as you're following along, listening to it on your screen reader? Well, if you were, you would hear the word stop sign. So this entire presentation is done using Press.js. You know, so it's all HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And you know, I've done it in such a way that on all these slides, they have titles that you can hear if you were to, you know, go through a screen reader. And on here, it would just say stop sign. Now, so this idea is you want to use all of these different design tools, you know, design, you know, techniques to convey the information. You know, one of the really good analogies I like to use is for people who are teaching. You know, this sort of, how do you teach a variety of people? You know, and so like there's some people who learn by reading. You know, some people learn better by hearing something. You know, other people learn better by actually getting their hands dirty and doing it. And the best teachers, you know, they put together a curriculum and all these activities to sort of teach whatever concept they want using each of these different methods so that the information is easier to absorb and it gets through to somebody if they can't read. It gets through to somebody if they can't hear. It gets through to somebody if they can't actually interact with it with their hands. So this is the key thing I really want to get across is as you're designing something for the website, use as many tools in your arsenal to get the information across with the design. And it helps for people who might not understand one of those things, but they can understand the others. And even for somebody who can understand everything, the more information you get them, the quicker it is that they can understand what it is. Okay, so hopefully through this talk, you'll kind of remember some of the stuff that I talked about, why accessibility is so important, you know, what are the 4 main types of disabilities we need to deal with, and then some of the specific design considerations. So, thank you. Any questions? Any questions?
Oh, I just, I have a request for help, I guess. When I did the exercise on the iPhone, I must have clicked something, and now it's just frozen. I can't use it at all. So I was wondering if somebody might have more expertise than me.
Sure, yeah.
You will help.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for showing us that there's really simple ways that we can help with accessibility. Because I know we don't make any time for it in our work budget, but there's a lot of things that are just good design that are also accessibility best practices.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so another thing I didn't really cover is, like, you want to have accessibility as part of your entire design process. You know, it's not just something you do at QA at the very end. You know, if you think about it from the beginning of your design process, it makes it a lot easier. It's just, you know, it's not like an extra thing on your checklist. It's just part of your natural process. Any other questions? Yep, go ahead.
I know it's not necessarily really design, but or maybe it is. Can you talk quickly about the Quail and JavaScript?
Quail?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of outside of scope. So the question is, what is Quail? So Quail.js is an open source sort of like accessibility testing tool. And it's JavaScript, and what it'll do is it'll read, you can set it to, you know, look at some markup on your page. And it will tell you if there's any sort of like accessibility problems with it. You know, and as you set it up, you can define like specific tests. You know, like, I need you to check if the headings are in order. You know, I want you to check if the links have text in them. And you can configure what test it does. So, like in some situations, like for an EPA.gov, we used it. We implemented it so that whenever anybody fills out a page, you know, when they hit save and they preview it, it runs these Quail tests. You can get all these accessibility issues. And we only want to test things that they have control over and nothing else. So it's really helpful to target what they need to check, plus only check the certain things that they have control over. Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? Okay, thank you.